Hello, and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we have another amazing guest to introduce to you now. Dr. Travis Einertson is a small animal veterinarian who is involved in medicine and surgery at the Heritage Pet Hospital in Rochester, Minnesota. Dr. Einertson has a special interest in reversing diabetes in cats using a very low carbohydrate diet. His track record in treating diabetes in companion animals is jaw dropping. Using low carbohydrate diets and literally nothing else, he is able to achieve complete remission in more than 70% of his feline patients. He uses the same diet to reverse obesity and other illnesses in the animals that he treats. He decided to take that low carbohydrate diet, the one that he had created for overweight cats, and reformulate it to improve his own health. The diet was based on similar principles and concepts from what had worked with the cats for several years. The Heritage Pet Hospital's biggest goal is to prevent chronic disease in the pet patients they treat by using many health interventions, including implementing a low carbohydrate, high protein diet. For more information, you can find Travis on Twitter at Low Carb Vet. Travis Einertson, what an absolute honor it is to welcome you to Boundless Body Radio.
Oh, Casey, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
It's such an honor. I'm a little bummed out I can't see you on Zoom. We're having a bit of technical difficulties, but that's okay. The screen looks black, but where you are, it's very, very white right now. That major storm that just rolled through the United States just rolled through Minnesota. So tell us about the weather where you are.
Yeah, I just was checking it a little bit ago. We were at -8, 18-mile-an-hour winds, -31 wind chill. So it's pretty rough right now.
That is absolutely brutal. I'm fortunate I didn't spend many years there. My parents moved to Bismarck, North Dakota for a few years based on my dad's job. And I was born in Bismarck, but only spent about a year there. And I think it was -44 with the wind chill there today.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been watching some of the ag Twitter people of in the Dakotas and Nebraska and Wyoming. Well, you just feel for those horses and those cattle and those
Oh,
ranch.
man. Yeah, I can't even imagine. I've been to Minnesota several times. I have been there in the winter, and it was brutally cold. But just to see hockey played everywhere was incredible. Made my heart so happy. At least you guys are playing my absolute favorite sport all over the place.
Right. Yeah, it's pretty intense. Neither of my kids played hockey, but a lot of my friends' kids are. And yeah, boy, it's quite the deal out here.
It was amazing to go to like a Buffalo Wild Wings on a Thursday night when like prime time television that everybody's watching is high school hockey. It's a huge deal. I absolutely love it.
Yeah, I do too. It's awesome.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, I'm so excited to talk to you about your work and everything that you've discovered. I think we're going to have a lot of crossovers here talking about animal nutrition and human nutrition, which I think will be absolutely fascinating. We'll probably, cross those lines several times back and forth. But I'm really curious to learn what you have learned. But tell us about your interest in becoming a veterinarian.
Yeah, well, I just grew up loving animals and always wanted to help animals. My dad was a veterinarian, so just kind of seemed like the logical fit. I graduated from Colorado State in 1994, and then I practiced in Alaska for a couple of years. And the first couple of years of my career, I was mixed animal. So I did large animals and small animal, which, in hindsight, I think it kind of gave me a little bit of background knowledge on a species appropriate diet, right? Because you're going to feed a horse an obligate herbivore, completely different than a cat, an obligate carnivore. But so I think that may have given me a little bit of benefit, or maybe just made me more crazy as I've gone on to learn more. But the feline diabetes is really what caused the switch for me. We have a diabesity epidemic in cats from like the 1980s till now. It's well over 500% increase, both diabetes and obesity. And when cats get diabetes, for all intents and purposes, it's type 2 diabetes. It's insulin resistance. And I was treating those cats the way I was trained, the way all the textbooks read, the way all the specialists said. I put them on a high fiber diet, kibble, which is high in carbs, and just what I now consider to be really industrial doses of insulin. Take really high doses of insulin. I always hated that disease because you could never achieve normal blood glucose. I mean, their blood sugars are just sky high, or they were so low they were in a coma or dead. And just to get a normal blood sugar was just rarely achievable. They might hit it twice a day on the way up and the way down. They could never keep them in that zone. But I never really questioned it because that's the way I was taught. The textbooks, the experts, are all in lockstep. And then this crazy ridiculous came out crazy, ridiculous research came out in 2001, and Dr. Greco is her name, and she was one of my instructors, who was just brilliant. I mean, she did the exact opposite in this small study. She put them on like a low carb, canned food, high protein, kind of like kitten diet. And she just used minuscule doses of insulin. And I was just stunned when I was reading what kind of results she had, because I had never experienced anything like that. And so I didn't wait until there was a bunch of randomized controlled trials. I just jumped in with my next diabetic, and within several months, the cat was in complete remission off all insulin. And then the next cat I treated the same way, complete remission in several months. The next cat, so I had 3 in a row, complete remissions off all insulin, normal blood sugars, no sugar in the urine, normal fructosamine, which is like an A1C. And I was just kind of shocked. I now realize in hindsight that was a little bit lucky to get 3 in a row, but it just kind of changed the way I looked at treating these. We started counting our cases over like a 2-year period, and we got up to like 70% of our cats were in remission. One time we got a little bit higher. Over time, though, our remission rates actually started to fall a little bit. And I think part of that is because people started Googling me and finding me and coming to me. And a lot of times by the time I would get these diabetic cats, they'd already been what I considered as mismanaged for way too many months, sometimes years. And you kind of have a brief window of time when you still have some functioning beta cells in that pancreas to achieve remission. And if they go too long, there's those feline beta cells are just really, really sensitive to glucose toxicity. So, yeah, and then I kept going on. It was just an amazing experience after 7 years of struggling mighty to get these cats in remission. And the cats that we didn't get into remission, I just remember 2 off the top of my head because they were in my records, but one was called Braveheart, the other one was called Lucy Marie. It could never achieve remission in those cats. They just required a minuscule dose of insulin twice a day for life. But Braveheart, we diagnosed them at age 9, and then at age 18, we ended up putting them to sleep for bladder cancer. But that's just, I just have never met another vet who's had a diabetic cat on insulin for 9 years. I mean, maybe I'm patting myself on the back too hard here. Maybe other people are doing that. I don't think you can do that without a low carb, high protein approach. I just don't think it's
Wow, that is absolutely amazing. I want to go back to your training. You mentioned textbooks. Was nutrition talked about in your training?
No, it's terrible. It's just like med school. I mean, it's just very little. And then what training we do have, unfortunately, I think is influenced by industry a lot. And a lot of our training was calorie math, figuring out how many calories they need. And, when you look at veterinary nutrition labels, it's just absolutely terrible. I mean, if you go to pick up some human food, you can look at the label, you can tell how many fats, proteins, carbs, it's all broken down. Veterinary nutrition labeling just sucks. I mean, you have to send people to the store with a calculator and some formulas, how they can do the math to find out the protein, carbs, and fat. And even then, it's still a guesstimate. It's frustrating to me that, and I've been in practice for 28 years now, and we still have not made any progress on getting better pet food labels.
Wow, that's crazy. Wow. Okay.
It's just kind of like I think about I teach nutrition in veterinary school. I wish there was more of that, just like I wish there was more of that in human medicine. But like in human medicine, when they do talk about increasing the nutritional training, unfortunately, I just think they're going to teach the food pyramid or my plate harder, which isn't really going to move the needle, in my opinion.
That was my argument also. Like, on paper, it sounds amazing if we can get doctors more training, but then you think about the training they're going to get, and it's like maybe they shouldn't get any more training than they get. Maybe they should get absolutely zero because they're getting taught the wrong stuff anyway.
Yeah, I know. I think you're going to have to unlearn that much more.
That's right.
And
That's
unlearning is challenging, right? It's really challenging. It took me a while to unlearn a lot of stuff. That's very challenging.
Wow. Okay, so before you found this solution, which is highly successful, just to clarify, you had seen no cats get better on any of the conventional treatments, especially with insulin?
We definitely saw improvements. You have an uncontrolled diabetic and get them on insulin. There's significant improvement. But typically, I want to say, and I'm not 100% right in the summer, but most diabetic cats will live about 3 years on insulin.
That's it.
Because if you're using the traditional approach with high insulin and high carb diets, you're just going to have such dramatic fluctuation in the blood sugars. And yeah, so, I kind of, we call it the Catkins diet. It's high protein, moderate fat, very low carb. But I think of that approach kind of similar to like a Dr. Bernstein, diabetes solution. Like, if you put minimal carbs in, you need minimal amounts of insulin, and you don't have those huge variations. I mean, I just think it makes sense.
You've given me several gems already in this conversation. Braveheart the cat is a great name. I might steal that for another
Yeah.
cat that I get. And the Catkins diet is absolutely fabulous. So thank you for both of those. That's fantastic. Wow. Okay. So did you notice that you were treating diabetic cats more and more as your career went on? Like, is this an increasing problem? I know you mentioned that it's increased by 500%, statistically, but anecdotally, you've noticed that.
Yeah, so you're asking a really brilliant question. So I do think our last time I checked, the rates are still going up. But for me, it started going down over time, and I'll tell you why. So after I started realizing you could reverse diabetes, or in the ones that you couldn't reverse, you could get excellent glucose management. And then I was listening to some of these holistic veterinarians in my field, and one of them said, yeah, she said you can use that same diet to reverse obesity. And I thought, that's ridiculous, because I'm a hypocrite. My own cat was overweight, and then I put her on the most expensive prescription weight loss diet you could buy. And over a period of several years, she went from overweight to mildly obese. And you might just say, well, Travis, you're feeding her too much. It's calories in, calories out. But I'll tell you what, when you have a cat or a pet, a dog that's hungry all the time, they're often going to win the battle, right? I mean, she's waking us up at night. We can't sleep. She's yelling. Finally, you just put more food in her bowl. Shut up so we can sleep. And so I thought it was ridiculous that this holistic vet suggested you could use that same diet that reverses diabetes. You could use that to reverse obesity. But I tried it with my own cat, N=1. And it was amazing. I put her on this canned cat food, which I thought was going to make her more obese because she loves canned cat food. And I thought she needed this high fiber, low protein prescription weight loss diet. But the weight just melted off her, Casey. I mean, she could jump up on high shelves and tables again. And it was just freaking amazing. And then so I started treating obese cats with that. And then they were losing weight similarly. And oftentimes when we didn't get all the weight loss, I just really wish I had DEXA scanners for these cats, because sometimes they would not really lose a significant amount of weight, but their muscle tone felt better. Their coats are better. The people are telling me how much more active the cat is, and I think the scale lies. I really wish I had a way to do better body composition rather than kind of a subjective, what we call body condition score. But maybe I'm fooling myself, but even those cats that didn't lose a significant amount of weight still gained a significant amount of improvements in body composition. And so then I think the reason my diabetes cases started dropping, at a certain point, I'm like, why do I wait until these cats get sick, fat, diabetic, these bladder problems called interstitial cystitis? Like, why do I wait till they get sick and then I recommend a species appropriate diet? So I just started recommending it for all the cats. I jokingly tell my clients, but there's a lot of truth in it. If you really take this information to heart, you're kind of hurting my bottom line, because all the stuff that keeps us so busy on a day-to-day basis just tends to not show up, or it shows up at a much lower frequency. And so, yeah, I just rarely get a new diabetic case anymore. Every time I do, it's just someone who looked me up on the internet, and like I say, those are really challenging cases because you usually can't achieve remission, but you can still get excellent glycemic control.
Wow. Well, being a nutrition coach, I often say we're really bad at business because, if people follow our advice, they tend to do really well and they don't need us for the rest of their lives. And so we end up putting ourselves out of business. It's interesting that you're doing the same thing with a completely different species.
Yeah, I know. I was listening to one of your podcasts, and I really enjoyed the part where you're talking about, like, when you're a trainer, it's 100% commission, you mentioned, right? And so you're only gonna be successful in a career if you're achieving good clinical outcomes. And I just, unfortunately, it's not the same in medicine like that, and it's disappointing.
Yeah, that is very disappointing. I appreciate you listening to the show. This is part of the reason why we invited you. Is hopefully we get a few more like downloads out of that. That's great. Um, I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about cats specifically. We'll talk about other animals and humans obviously as we go, but if you can talk about cats specifically and how they evolved, like where exactly they came from, and kind of how they would have eaten, back back evolutionarily, I guess.
Yeah, so my understanding is almost all the domestic cats we have here in this country are descendants of the African desert cat. And the African desert cat is 100% carnivore. When you analyze their diets, it's rabbits, rodents, mice, birds, lizards. I mean, it's just all animal-based food. And so I think if you look at their natural heritage, all of our cats descended from the African wildcat. I mean, I know some of my colleagues think I'm crazy, but I think we should try to minimize the natural max, try to have a natural diet that will, mirror that. And I think the other big thing with cats, it's not probably true with dogs, is when you look at the African desert cat, there's not much water in the desert. So maybe I've read a study, up to 90% of their daily moisture needs comes from the moisture in the prey that they catch. Because it turns out little mammals are like big mammals, we're all roughly 70% moisture. Canned food is 70% moisture. Dry food is only 10% moisture. So if you put these cats on a dry food diet, they will drink more water, but I don't think they drink ever enough to be like fully hydrated. And so if you're mildly dehydrated day in, day out, it puts a strain on the system, particularly kidneys, which depending on what research you look at in cats is either cancer and kidney disease are the top two leading causes of death. So it's an unproven hypothesis that if you keep a cat well hydrated throughout its life, you could maybe delay the onset of kidney failure. It makes sense to
Wow.
me, but I argue with colleagues because not very many people agree with me, but I think it's worth looking at.
Wow, that is absolutely fascinating. Do we know? I, this is probably debatable. I know I can domesticate my dogs. I don't know if I can domesticate my cat. She is a stone cold killer. She lives outside. She loves eating all the voles on the hill in front of our house. So domestication is maybe going a little too far. But how did our paths kind of converge, and how did we start kind of cohabitating together?
Well, so I don't want to sound like I'm an authority on this. It's not really my wheelhouse, but just from a
Right.
little poking around I did, like back when in the Fertile Crescent, back at the Egyptians, and we started cultivating grains, and then the rats were such a big problem. So it sounds like that I think that in that Fertile Crescent is where these cats were first adopted, and they're highly held in high esteem in those early farming communities because they wanted to protect their grain crops. And so I think we just started to domesticate them at that point.
Interesting. Wow. Okay. So to explain a little bit the difference between cats and dogs specifically, and what the difference between like an obligate carnivore is versus what a dog is. Can you explain that?
Yeah, so this is my understanding. So cats are obligate carnivores. They cannot survive without animal-based foods. Now, dogs, they say, are facultative omnivores. And they'll point to some things like dogs do have some mutations from like wolves, where they can have more copies of the pancreatic amylase. And so a lot of people in my field will use that to justify the high carb diets that we tend to feed dogs. I don't know. I kind of look at it more like there's some adaptations that probably dogs made as they co-evolved with humans. And as humans were evolving to an agricultural based societies where they're eating more carbohydrates, probably the wolves that they had domesticated, only the ones that were able to acquire maybe more pancreatic amylase copies were the ones that survived to breed, like a natural selection. That's the way I look at it in my mind. And I know there's people that are much better at talking about this than me, but I've looked at some debates about whether canines are true carnivores or obligate carnivores. I guess you could say that they're not necessarily obligate carnivores. I think you can probably meet those amino acids requirements and the vitamin requirements if it's highly supplemented and with with stuff. But I don't know. I still believe like if you look at the natural diet of wolves, which I spent a fair amount of time looking at, I just think you're going to get similar benefits with dogs as you will with cats. Probably not as profound, but similar.
So for somebody who's not familiar, I know this isn't your wheelhouse, but so for somebody that's not familiar with the evolution of dogs versus cats, dogs, you already mentioned it. They kind of like cohabitated with us, and we essentially made dogs. I thought this was really well explained in the TV show Cosmos, where the host kind of talks about how, we basically made this kind of a deal with a wolf where they would get, our scraps, they could gnaw on the bones that we have, they could use the excess protein that we didn't need, and we would get, something that we could domesticate to have around to protect us or to help us hunt. Is that the way you understand that?
Yeah, that's the way I understand it too. And it's interesting, like when I went on my own low carb journey after seeing all the benefits in my patients, and I just spent so much time going through the weeds on this stuff and looking up mouse studies and all kinds of stuff. I was never really able to make it make sense until I read Good Calories, Bad Calories by Gary Toms. And in that book, he talks about like the Eskimos, and then he talked about these Arctic explorers like Stefansson. And then this is like in the early 1900s. And then when they kind of came back to society in the 1920s, that's after we discovered like vitamin C and insulin, I guess. But and they were talking about how you can survive on an all meat diet, and everyone was saying that's just complete crap. And they did a huge study back in 1928 with Eugene Dubois, in metabolic wards and nothing but the carnivore diet, which I found fascinating. But then I kind of wanted to read some of Stefansson's book on that polar exploration, and it's absolutely fascinating. But what's fascinating to me is when you look at those sled dogs, and how many thousands of miles they did on those sledging trips. And it talks about, they like get a seal for the explorers to eat, but then how they just feed the guts and all the stuff they didn't want, the lungs and the trachea and, all to the dogs. And I was just fascinated that dogs could survive in such a harsh environment and doing such extraordinary, tremendous physical work, but yet they thrive at that. And I guess the whole point, I'm sorry, I'm babbling here, but when you do look at these different copy numbers of pancreatic amylase, it's different in those Arctic northern breeds than it is in, say, like a Saluki that evolved over in the Egypt area. So I just think like they probably, dogs were able to adapt to higher carb diets. The ones that couldn't probably got bred out. But I realized this is not. Did you say Cosmos was the name of that show? I got to look that up.
Oh, it's fantastic. It kind of talks about our evolution and everything from the Big Bang on that happened, and so it zooms out really large and talks about the universe, and zooms in really tight, talks about us and our evolution. It's absolutely fantastic. It's probably like 2014 on Fox, I think it was released, but yeah, it's a fascinating series, and he does talk about like what it might have been like 30,000 years ago when we were up against wolves, and maybe we were competing for the same food, or maybe going against each other, but for whatever reason we just kind of developed this amazing relationship. And back then, 30,000 years ago, there's not a dog. A dog does not exist. Every single dog that we have evolved from whatever that one wolf that started the whole thing, and we would selectively breed them, and so the cute one would maybe be bred with the fast one, and you get that kind of a hybrid. And the strong one that was good in the wintertime up in northern climates, those two would be bred together. And now we've got all these crazy varieties of dogs, but most people, I don't think, really consider that that is not a natural thing, and we have greatly sped up their evolution in just the last, I think, 20 or 30 years is what they think. Can you verify any of that?
Well, so my understanding is like, I think the hypothesis that this domestication of wolves to dogs took place in probably a couple different places across the world, at separate points. It's interesting, like you say, like this huge diversity of dog breeds we have now. I don't think there's any other species on the planet that has been bred to have so many diverse traits, from size and hair coat to personality traits to the morphology of their head and their jaws. But the thing I argue about with my colleagues is like, I say we should feed them like wolves, and they're just telling me like, yeah, that Chihuahua is not a wolf. That Great Dane is not a wolf, and I get it, but man, I think the physiology is still the same, right? They still don't have salivary amylase, and I've done kind of some deep dives on this. When you look at their gastrointestinal tract, man, it's really similar to people. I mean, when you look at the the gastric proper, where all the hydrochloric acid is produced, and the kind of pH that they can achieve, and the parietal cell density, like how many of these cells in the glandular portion of the stomach that are producing it, and the length of the small intestine and the large intestine, and how like you look at other non-human primates, how they have just such a massive large colon and a big appendix or cecum, if you will. It's just amazing how human visceral anatomy evolved over the years, and just it's remarkably strikingly similar to dogs and cats. So I find that whole thing interesting. But I guess my colleagues that say that they can thrive on high carbohydrate diets, I just disagree with them. I think they can survive on high carbohydrate diets, but I don't think they're going to fully thrive till we can more closely imitate a species appropriate diet. But Casey, I should just let your listeners know that I realize I'm crazy. I mean, there's a time when I used to try to be normal, but I don't really care anymore. This is my thoughts.
That's great. Well, I told you via email, we love the crazy. If you want to come on a show and be crazy, we love it. I think all of that is absolutely fascinating as well. I have heard, and again, you'd be the perfect person to ask, that the dog's digestive system is the most similar of any animal to a human. Is that correct from what you understand, or at
That's what
least
I
in
am
your
understanding.
experience?
Yeah, that's what I'm understanding, and maybe I'm not understanding it correctly. But yeah, just when you look at the, all these, like it's more close to a dog and a cat than it is to, like chimps, our most closest relative. So
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought up the chimps. I was just thinking that, like, yes, we came from that kind of lineage, but we made some huge separations and made some big compromises thousands and thousands of years ago that led us down a completely different path. And yes, we are very similar to a chimpanzee, but that doesn't mean we have any kind of a similar life or similar way of eating. We don't hang the same way, but we can throw things a lot better. Yeah, our digestive system's totally different. The structure of the jaw, like all of that human anatomy, is vastly different than a chimpanzee. You look at a dog and you think, okay, this thing doesn't look anything like me. But you have to consider again that we have this very special relationship that we evolved together, probably eating all of the same things.
yeah, see, I think that's why when they say like we co-evolved, I just think it makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah. Wow. I love that. Another thing I wanted to ask you about, I've heard this as well. I don't see this anywhere. Maybe you have. Are dogs the only other animal that have the whites of eyes?
They have the what? I'm sorry.
The white of the eye, the area of the eye that has the white part. Are dogs the only other animal that has that besides humans?
See, that's a really good question. I don't know, Casey. I wish I could
Huh.
sound smart. I don't know.
Fair. Yeah, I appreciate that. I remember hearing, and this makes sense to me, that through evolution, we needed ways to communicate with our best buds who were our hunting helpers. And that was one way that we could have nonverbal communication is by shifting our eyes and having that eye white. And I heard that dogs evolved with that same trait because of that. So interesting to speculate on.
Yeah, that is. It is because I don't really spend a lot of time on it, but I keep coming across articles in my vet news stuff about how much dogs learn from our body language, not just that, and vice versa. It's like how much of
Mm.
our communication is nonverbal, and yeah, that seems like that would fit in that scenario.
Just watching my dog Rex, if he wants to go play with his chuck it toy, he'll just look back and forth and back and forth, and we had that kind of communication. I can do the same thing. If I look at his toy, he'll look at the toy and look back. And yeah, it's interesting to speculate on. You mentioned this several times. I think this is fascinating. People are argumentative with you about your ideas, yet your success rates are insane. Who is arguing with you about some of these ideas?
Oh, it's mostly with the academics. I don't know. Just to be clear, and I'm just a regular vet. I'm in the trenches day in, day out, medicine and surgery, right? And the people I have these arguments with, I mean, they have all kinds of extra degrees. They're board certified, PhDs, and so I don't know. I realize I haven't had the amount of training they've had, but I also realize they haven't had as much time in the trenches as I've had. So I don't know. It kind of seemed to discount personal experience. This evidence-based medicine model, which I think is good, but I just think it's been kind of bastardized to a point where clinical experience has kind of been weeded out. And I think that's a mistake, in human
Yeah.
medicine and veterinary medicine. So yeah, I don't know. I realize I'm the crazy one, I don't really care anymore, but
Good for you.
when I was going along this evolution and started reversing diabetes and started reversing obesity, and then one of these holistic vets who I used to think those guys were kind of crazy. She made the point, like, the more closely you can mimic an animal's ancestral diet, the less chronic disease you're going to have. And I was like, that doesn't sound crazy,
Yeah.
but it'll get you in arguments with the academics, that's for sure.
Very interesting. We've also talked a little bit about the influence of industry. Is that pretty a strong correlation from what you've seen, that like a pet food company is getting into the level that you're at on the ground and is influencing the way that you and your colleagues practice?
Yeah, I think the industry influence is huge, and they're the ones who support a lot of our CE. So if we want to do CE on nutrition, continuing education, then it's usually funded by a food company. And if not, it's being taught by a nutritionist who is funded by food companies. So I think that's a problem, and I don't really know how to get around it, because just not a lot of people are going to go out and fund the kind of nutritional studies I would like to see, because there's not going to be a lot of it's going to be home prepared food, and there's just not going to be financial incentive. So
I really hope the listener has made all of the conclusions that you're getting at here, and how similar this is to the story of our health and our nutrition, I think is fascinating. Before we leave pets, I do want to ask you, what would be a better way, in your opinion? How do you feed cats? How do you feed dogs? What do you think is the ideal way to feed these pets, and in like a practical way?
okay, so I'm glad you asked this. On cats, I'm quite confident about this. I realize I could be wrong, but I'm quite confident that just a canned cat food, even the inexpensive stuff, like I'm not afraid to say Purina, Friskies Classic Pate, we reverse more diabetic cats with that diet than anything else. And I've had many conversations with my clients. We're looking at pet food labels, which I already said pet food labels stink. You can't really tell what's in there. But they'll show me these other brands and it's supposed to be better, but it costs 4 times as much. I just tell people, I think if you even just feeding the cheap canned cat food, eliminating the dry kibble, I think it's going to get you a long ways down the road. I think it's probably similar for dog food too, but I'm not as confident. But I guess my theory is, like, you're going to have way less processing in the canned food. And another point I'll bring up is I am a fan of byproducts. I know that's a controversial thing. Some of these pet food companies trying to throw their label out there, does not contain byproducts. So I'm a fan of byproducts. So those byproducts, most of them are coming from the animals that you and I are eating, the beef, the sheep, the goat, whatever, the heart, liver, lungs, spleen, thymus, all those organs that we're not eating are extremely nutrient dense for pets. So I'm a big fan of byproducts, but I feel comfortable saying that, like, canned cat food, canned dog food, this thing is going to be minimally processed, and it's interesting, like when you look at the human dietary wars, you got the vegans on one side, you have the carnivorous paleo on the other, and you have Mediterranean in between, and we're all arguing all the time. But the one thing everyone seems to agree on is eat nutrient dense food that's minimally processed. And I just don't think you can find a more heavily processed food than kibble. I understand it. I mean, they made it taste good. It's cheap. You don't have to refrigerate it. You can just set it on a shelf and it's good for, a year. I get the ease and the convenience, but I just think a more minimally processed, canned, animal-based meat diet that
Wow.
has byproducts or organs. I don't know.
Yeah.
I really, you gotta understand, if you have any veterinarians out there listening to this, they tuned off long ago, because that I know I sound like the lunatic. I get it.
No, it's amazing, and yeah, like I understand why we're all bickering about that, but I agree with you. It's like we're talking about the differences that we have in eating plants or eating animal products, and we're certainly advocates of the carnivore diet. But like, if you're a vegan, you're at least thinking about nutrition, and you're trying to get out those processed foods out of your diet. We have so much more in common than we have separation. I wish we could recognize that and stop so much of the bickering that we are absolutely guilty of. You're totally right. So okay, so back to cat food. What are we talking for costs? The cheapest cat food? I'm not as familiar with are you talking like this is $10 a day, this is $20 a day, or is this like 50 cents a day?
If I go to like Costco or Sam's Club, I could buy like a huge case of cans, and it turns out to be anywhere from around 50 to 75 cents a day.
Wow. Wow. I mean, that seems like a comparable price to dry cat food, right? At that rate?
I think it's going to be just a little bit more but it's not going to break the bank, I guess. And man, you're going to make it back on keeping your cat out of the vet clinic. I think you're going to.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Awesome. Okay. So that takes care of the cat side. Back to dogs. I know you've referenced him before. Of course, I'm going to forget his name right now. He's the doctor in, I want to say, Australia that is a promoter of the barf diet. Is that correct?
Yeah, Dr. Billinghurst, I think.
Billinghurst.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fascinating episode that he did on Carnivore Cast with Scott Mazinski, by the way.
Oh, I got to check that out because I'm a fan of his work. I've read his book. I haven't seen him interviewed on podcasts.
It was, I want to say it was May of 2022. Fascinating. I'm so glad Scott reached out to him to get him scheduled. What do you think of that particular approach? And you've read his book. Obviously, you didn't come up with stuff. Can you comment a little bit about what he recommends?
Well, yeah, so that is what I feed my dog. Is is that biologically appropriate raw food diet or the barf diet? I came to this slowly because the veterinary field, just to make sure the veterinary field is violently opposed to these raw food diets for dogs or cats. But I mean, when I say violently opposed, I really do mean violently opposed. And so that was kind of the training I had, and my clinical experience is what changed my mind, because I'd have these clients come in and I'd be examining the dog. I'm like, God, these teeth are amazing. The coat's amazing. This dog is buff, man. She's shredded. She's strong. And I just like, what are you feeding her? And they're saying, oh, she's on a raw food diet. And I was like, stop. I know she looks good now, but you're probably slowly killing her. I mean, salmonella, E. coli, parasites, if you don't do it just right, you're gonna get vitamin, mineral imbalances, and she's gonna deteriorate. I was like, hey, you got kids at home, you don't want your kids getting salmonella or campylobacter. I gave them a really good lecture that would have made any veterinary nutritionist really proud. But I don't know how many of those people quit me, but the thing I'm just shocked about is how many stayed with me. And year after year, I would just see these dogs thriving. And I was like, finally, after several years, instead of them getting a lecture they didn't want, I asked them, I'm like, okay, how in the hell are you doing this? And they're like, oh, these people would light up, Casey. They're like, you got to read this book, you got to read this book, you got to go to this blog, it has to be balanced. You can't just go throwing raw meat at it and think you're doing it right. And that's what I think this the Dr. Billinghurst from Australia does such a good job in his book. I don't know. The veterinary field is really opposed to it, but I don't know. My own dogs have benefited tremendously. I don't go around recommending it, by the way, because I know I'll probably get sued. But if people choose to do it, then I support them. And so the word kind of got out in our region, and so I ended up getting all these crazy people like myself with these raw food diets, and I've just seen a lot of health benefits. It's rare for me to see a health problem. So,
wow. Hard to argue against that when you're on, in the trenches, like you said, you're doing the work and you're witnessing what is going on. Again, you kind of mentioned it earlier. It's the same way I found low carbohydrate diets to begin with. I don't care what people eat, but if all of these people started getting better and started losing fat and feel great, like, I guess that's what I'm going to do. I don't really care what, my textbook says or whatever. And that does make a lot of sense to me. I'm not very familiar with his work, only just, re-listening to that episode this week in preparation for this conversation. But like, it's a combination of, you got some raw food, some bone meal, I guess, mixed in. You've got some plant material that's also mixed in. But he was even talking about, like, you don't have to get the percentages exactly the same every single time. You can vary the diet. And he was even mentioning things like intermittent fasting. Like, again, this might be controversial, but he was suggesting that it would be okay for you to feed a dog once a day, once every other day. They could eat as much as they like, as long as they're getting the right nutrients. They might not need to eat as many, meals as we think they should. I thought that was fascinating.
Casey, I'm so glad to bring this up because I totally agree with you. but the veterinary nutrition is going to be mad at me for saying that. But yeah, I totally believe that now. And I think you have a lot more flexibility with the nutrients and that in the background of a healthy diet like that. Just like vitamin C in people, if you're on an ultra low carb diet, your vitamin C requirements are dramatically less. And I just wonder if there's similar interactions with dogs. And yeah, I agree with you, or you too, on this point of intermittent fasting. I've had a lot of my clients ask me about it, and I was telling them, we just don't have any really good studies on it in dogs, but I'm doing it with my dogs, and I do my fasting. I have my dogs fast periodically. And then on Twitter, a gal reached out to me. She's a researcher in South Africa and sent me an article out of a European journal where they were doing intermittent fasting in dogs, which looked to be quite beneficial. So I don't know. I haven't had time to like plow through the research on that, but I think it makes sense. When you look at the wolves, they're kind of on a, feast and fast cycle. The pack of wolves take down a deer or an elk, and then they feast for several days, and then they're chewing on the scraps for a couple of days, and then they're hungry for several days. And this veterinary nutrition idea that they have to have, 2 to 3 meals a day, 24/7, 365, I just question that. Are you still there, Casey?
I can't hear you at all. It just cut out like
Okay,
30 seconds.
I
Got you.
can hear you now.
Got you. Okay, great. Welcome back. I'll edit that. So you can just finish the thought. You can just finish the thought about the studies in South Africa.
Oh yeah. So it was a European journal, but a researcher from South Africa sent it to me. Which is one of the cool things about Twitter. You start to make some friends on there, and these people are hardcore researchers, and they find papers that in veterinary medicine that I just would not find. It's not in my typical journals. But yeah, it showed benefits of intermittent fasting in dogs, and it was a small study and it wasn't real long duration, but I'd really like to see more research on that, because I just think this notion of having to be fed 2 to 3 times a day, every day of their life, I question that. I really question it.
Interesting. I would just say anecdotally, owning pets, I don't think my dogs are really interested in food more than once a day. They want to do other things. They want to run on the hill, or they want to sleep. They're not really interested in their food that often. So that makes a lot of sense. We're sitting here talking about animals. We've talked about low carbohydrate. We've talked about intermittent fasting. All of these things that we're talking about with pets. So we're, again, different species. Dogs over here, cats over here, humans, we're over here. In your opinion, in your experience, the digestive systems, the way the animal works, all of those things versus humans, are we vastly, vastly different species, or are there a ton of similarities between the way our pets should be eating and the way we should be eating?
Well, I think it's similar, Casey. And I know that makes me crazy, but yeah, I think we should all be on an animal-based diet. I really do. In the veterinary nutrition world, that's the other thing that there's just such little appreciation for is the anti-nutrients that are in plants. And then another thing there's so little appreciation for is the amount of linoleic acid that's so high in pet foods nowadays. I just think we've gone so far away from what's an evolutionarily appropriate diet. And I think that remarkable similarities between dogs, cats, and humans. I find it striking.
Wow. And I know we're both huge fans of Tucker Goodrich and his work with vegetable oils, but let's
Yes.
use this as a transition to talk about you and your own health. As you're learning all this stuff about your cats, you're surely making these conclusions about humans. When did it come into your consciousness that, boy, maybe like what I'm seeing with my pets and my patients is also happening to humans and human beings?
Well, yeah, I remember it quite well because this was back like in the very late 90s when the Atkins diet was really the craze. And a lot of my clients, I see them once a year. And then, so I haven't seen them for 12 months, and they've lost like a ton of weight. I'm like, holy cats, what are you doing? What happened to you? And they're like, I lost 30 pounds, 40 pounds, 50 pounds on the Atkins diet. I'm like, oh my God. Well, you sure look good, but you're clogging your arteries and you're killing your kidneys, But anyways, I saw so many people losing weight and really feeling good. And then at the time, I was trying a really low fat diet. I was trying high fiber diets. I don't know why, because it never worked for my patients, but I thought somehow it worked for me. and it didn't. Trying to increase the gym time more and more. And then in 2001, we had a baby, and then bought a business. And so I just went on the Atkins diet, and because I saw a randomized controlled trial that was so much better. I mean, everything, the LDL, HDL, blood pressure, blood sugar, everything was better except for the LDL-C. But I think I'm going to try it. And it was like my cat, like the weight melted off me. And I just lost this weight without hunger. And that's what really drove me crazy, is because I thought of myself as a weight loss expert. I used to be a wrestler and did a lot of tough cuts. And the key to losing weight is pretty simple. You got to be hungry all the time. If you're not hungry all the time, then you got to beat yourself up for eating too big of a meal and jump on the scale all the time. Like I just knew you had to be hungry all the time to lose weight. So when I lost all that weight without hunger, it just drove me crazy trying to figure out the answer. I didn't really could get very far on that answer until Gary Taub's book. Which, by the way, I just throw a plug out there. Daniel Shuloff wrote a book called Dogs, Dog Foods, and Dogma. I think he's the closest thing we have to a Gary Taub's in the veterinary world. It's worth reading if you're interested in this type of stuff. But yeah, how you could lose weight without hunger was fascinating to me.
Yeah, and Gary Taubes is one of the best people to explain that phenomenon. And I love the example that he uses in one of his books. I can't remember which one, but he says, if I invited you to an amazing dinner and I put on the biggest spread of the best foods, come hungry, what then would be your behaviors to go to that dinner? And most people would think, okay, well, I'm probably going to skip some meals. I'm definitely not going to eat before I go. And maybe I'll do some extra exercise or workout because I know that will make me more hungry. Yet most people don't make that connection that's exactly what a normal diet does. It makes you very hungry.
Exactly, and I think that's the other problem. Like I've been frustrated with weight loss and dogs trying to use these conventional weight loss diets, and that they're not really controlling the satiety. So veterinarians, they get frustrated, like, well, I put this dog on this diet and it's not losing weight, and you blame the people. People don't like to see their dog starving and begging all the time and breaking into the trash can and breaking into cupboards, like. Just like my cat, when I couldn't sleep, you just do whatever you can do to pacify him so you can try to have a normal life. And I just wish there was better appreciation in my field for like the satiety properties of the higher protein diets, I don't know.
Yeah. Wow. So it sounds like you were a very early adopter on a low carbohydrate diet on yourself that was then validated with other authors. Is that correct?
Yes. I mean, I lost the weight, and then, I went to my doctor who I never saw, and I was just like, I'm down 30 pounds. And he's like, good for you. How'd you do it? And I'm like, I'm on the Atkins. He goes, oh, well, we better do some blood work and see how much damage you've caused, and he was shocked, and I was shocked that every single thing was better, except for maybe my LDL-C. But, when you look better, you feel better, you perform better, and all the biomarkers, except for one, are going in the right direction. For me, it just made sense to keep doing with what I'm doing. And then later on, incorporated in the fasting and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's great. This is why I'm so grateful for people like Dave Feldman who are doing a lot of the research into LDL cholesterol, because that's exactly what happened to Dave Feldman. You go low carb, you lose a bunch of weight, you feel amazing, your brain feels better, your blood pressure drops, you don't need medication, you go to your doctor and your doctor says, well, you're going to die. All that other stuff is great, but now you're going to die of a heart attack. I'm so glad we're getting more information. Certainly nothing conclusive at this point, but even in your work with animals and doing blood work with animals, I've heard you talk about this with Dr. Sean Baker. You've seen cholesterol numbers that would be very, very high that would lead you, I guess, in the direction of maybe high cholesterol is not necessarily bad for our pets, and maybe it's not all that bad for us either without other things being wrong. Is that safe to say?
Well, the thing with high cholesterol in dogs is when you see that in a dog, it's usually, it can be associated with a lot of things, but hypothyroidism is the big one. But I guess the point I think I was trying to make on Sean Baker's podcast was that even with wickedly high cholesterol numbers, regardless of the cause, we just don't tend to see the atherosclerotic heart disease. We don't get those atheromas, and I'm not exactly sure why. I'm just not sure why.
Yeah, interesting. So talking again about your health journey and the things you learned along the way, as if I understand this correctly, you also have dealt with a very difficult diagnosis in your own personal life. Is that correct?
Yeah, so it is cruising along. I thought I was kind of figuring things out with my own health, with my patient's health. And then I got diagnosed about 10 years ago with a brain tumor. And that was kind of a big kick, and ended up having a 15-hour craniotomy. The brain tumors invaded my brain stem, so they couldn't get it all out. And then 6.5 weeks of radiation therapy, and I had some bad side effects. The biggest one has been double vision. Got hearing loss too, but double vision is just was incapacitating. I was unable to drive for a couple months, and yeah, I wasn't unable to do surgery anymore. So it was really tough setback, but things slowly improved. I kind of went really hardcore on my keto diet, and 1 meal a day, calorie restricted. I started making more longer prolonged fasts, and I don't know if it's because of those things or despite those things, but I did slowly improve. I was able to get back to practice, and it took me a while to kind of get my confidence back, but I was able to go back to practice full time. And then here, that's over the last 1.5 years, my brain tumor started growing again. It could never get it all out. And so now I retired. I'm in a new study. It's a phase 2 study on it's IV radiation. So it's called Lutathera is the brand name, but you give IV radiation and it accumulates at the brain tumor site. And in my case, it stopped it from growing. It doesn't kill it, doesn't shrink it, but very, very thankful, very thankful. If it can keep it stopped, I'm just, not a lot of people get a second chance at something like this. And so I'm just very, very thankful, Casey.
Wow, that's incredible. I've never heard of that type of treatment. That's very relatively new.
So it's been approved for like neuroendocrine tumors. So it has some good use there. Efficacy is pretty good from what I've seen, but the safety is quite good too. So
Great.
it's exciting. But yeah, there's a small phase 1 on using it for brain tumors. It depends if you have the right brain tumor. You have to go through some special testing to see if your brain tumor has a high concentration of somatostatin receptors. And thankfully, mine did. Mine was the highest one that this study group here at Mayo Clinic has ever seen. So I'm very thankful to get into that trial.
That's incredible. I'm so happy to hear that. That's great. I know you've commented on this in the past, but what can you say about the work of somebody like Dr. Thomas Seyfried, who's looked into low carbohydrate and kind of ketogenic style diets with cancer?
Yeah, I'm so glad. And I got to tell you, I just love that podcast. I've listened to one of the 2 podcasts, and I did not realize that he was colleagues and friends with Dr. Cahill and Dr. Veach. And, I've read a lot of stuff.
Mind blowing.
I know. I should have known they're all in the same kind of area, but I just blew my mind. But no, he's been a big inspiration to me, and it's why I've done what I have. But, there was a time when on my follow-ups where my brain tumor actually did shrink slightly. When I say slightly, they're talking like a millimeter here or there. So nothing shocking, but that was when I was really down to a very low weight. I got down to my high school weight with doing some pretty extreme fasting and ketogenic diets. But yeah, I just think it makes sense to me. If I can keep my insulin low, if I can keep my sugar low, if I can try to create an environment where the healthy cells in my bodies can live, and even though I can't maybe kill this damn tumor, if I could try to help it not thrive, it just makes sense to me.
Yeah, live with it and live with a high quality of life for however long that is. That's amazing. What can you tell us a little bit about your diet today, where you are with that?
Hey, I'm pretty much carnivore adjacent. I do OMAD, the 1 meal a day. My diet is it's not quite carnivore, but it's carnivore adjacent.
Very cool. So 1 meal a day. Do you know about how many calories you would be eating, or what the kind of split between like proteins and fats would be?
No, I really don't. And it's hard because, a lot of the meat we eat is the meat that we get, a lot of venison and elk and fish. So, I don't know, that stuff doesn't come with packages. I never weigh or measure anything.
Cool. Yeah, that sounds like you're doing everything correctly, and it's just, I don't know, it's amazing the parallels of everything that you've learned, not only with the animals that you treat that you care so much about, but also with humans and your own body. I mean, what an amazing process to go through. And yeah, you're right. Like if I were you, I would give two shits what anybody thought out there about what I was doing or what I was suggesting to people, because you're seeing people get better. You're seeing animals get better. Like what an amazing story and what an amazing journey you've gone on. So cool.
Yeah, thanks, Casey.
This has been one of my absolute favorite conversations. Can you tell people where they can go to find you and connect with you and your work?
You know, I, low carb vet on Twitter at low carb vet. I don't have like a website or anything, or I'm just here to learn. But Casey, I got to tell you, the other thing when I've been listening to your podcast that made me so dang happy is when you're talking about Doug McGuff, Body by Science, and that just brought so much joy to me because that was another big thing. That was way before my brain tumor, but like getting my physical composition improved. And at the time I had two kids and a business, and you just don't have the time to spend at the gym that you used to. And wow, you combine that with a low carb, high protein diet. It's just some really low hanging fruit out there for people, excellent return on investment. And I just wish more trainers like you were on board with that, because I just makes a ton of sense.
Well, thank you. It changed my whole career, my whole approach to people. It's amazing. The Body by Science. So is that the way that you do your strength training?
Correct. Yeah.
15, 20 minutes a week, just maxing out on a few different exercises and leave the gym?
Yeah, I usually do my routine, do a couple exercises, about 22 minutes. Yeah, 22 minutes once a week. Now that I'm retired, I've been trying to go twice a week, but yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, his work is absolutely so influential. It's cool that you're doing that as well. Like it's fun to feel not only nuts in your career, but also nuts when you go to the gym and you're walking out of the gym 20 minutes after you got there and you're a sweaty mess, but that's it. You don't need to come back for a week or a few days. Like it's such a game changer.
Yeah, and I've seen it in my canine patients too. I kind of slowly came to this, and I realize again I could be wrong, but some dogs are just genetically gifted. They're just built well. But I started noticing a lot of my patients that were really built well. I'd like, wow, this dog is mean, lean, muscular, strong. Like, wow, you must be a runner. And they're like, no, my knees, I can't run anymore. But if I can just get her out, like 5 minutes a day, 5 minutes a couple times a day, and throw her ball so she can sprint after her ball. Well, I just think that sprinting in dogs is like resistance training for people.
Yeah.
Have to be long sessions, because then I will run into the other extreme. I made some embarrassing mistakes in the exam room. I'm like, oh, your dog's gaining a little bit of weight and getting a little chubbier. And she's like, how can that be? We've been running 30 miles a week together. I'm training for a half marathon. Oh, I just want to bite my lip. I feel so bad. I'm not trying to hurt anybody's feelings. I'm like, well, just, watch the treats. But I'm starting to think that high intensity training is beneficial for dogs too. I don't know that they need a bunch of chronic cardio. I think, yeah, getting plenty of movement, like McGuff suggests, is very important. But I think
Yeah.
if you just have some high intensity training, I think you're going to get some muscle hypertrophy and better glucose disposal and all this stuff.
Couldn't agree more, man. The parallels between the animals that we love, our fur babies, and us as humans is just so amazing. Dr. Travis Einertson, thank you so very much for all of this discussion. Again, this was one of my absolute favorite conversations. I really appreciate everything that you've done, everything you've learned in your career, and for taking the time to be on our show today. We super appreciate you.
All right. Thanks, Casey.
Thank you so much. And this has been another episode of Balanced Body Radio.